Welcome to Vintage Photoshop. This morning we're going to take a look at this beautiful old Soviet and a very popular lens, which is Helios 44-4 in this case. This lens became very popular and cost effective for DSLRs or mirrorless cameras. It is a beautiful lens and definitely requires some attention, and you can do a very good quality, very sharp quality images, photo or video. So without further ado, let's take a look at it. To proceed with refurbishing of this lens, we will need to use some tools. And we will need to take off a mount which has 4 screws. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sometimes these screws can sit rather tight, possibly because it was Loctite was used. So we will use a special tool, which is a simple special tool. In my case, I'm using an old Russian syringe that I have filled with WD-40, and it requires only 1 drop of this product, WD-40, to possibly loosen up the Loctite. If it used, I don't know, but we just used it 1 drop on each screw, and that's pretty much it. It'll stay there for a few seconds, and it really helps a lot during taking off the screws without damaging the thread or damaging the screw head. And that's very important, because if the damage is done, there is no way to take off the mount and or further destroy the beautiful lens. So we'll be very careful about that. And I have never opened this lens before, so we'll just let the WD-40 do its work. It penetrates the threads, and then it's I think it's a lot easier, based on my experience, to opening those screws, taking off without any damage. So let's proceed. So the next, obviously, we will take off the mount. As you can see, there is a little pin over here. This pin is for controlling the aperture, and as you press on it, you can see a closure and opening of the aperture. This pin, I will show you in a second. This pin is touches the control, and you have to be careful because it's a free-sitting pin and you don't want to lose it. So we'll take off the mount, careful, holding that pin as well, and it's off. And you can see on the side that this pin right here is easily can be lost, so you have to be careful. So I usually put this face down further and put the screws inside that mount and move it aside. As we took off the rear mount, then we can see the inside of the lens, and I wanted to show you a pin that controls the aperture. This pin is controlled by this latch. Once you press on it, you can see the closure and opening of the aperture, and the pin that we took off from the lens mount is exactly controls that. So you can see the traces of particles and dust on the lens element, and we will have to deal with it. But before we do that, I can see that we have some little scratches right over here that I want to take care of this, and the best way is obviously we can just kind of go with a Sharpie and paint it. You know, it's usually works pretty well, and once it dries, then you can hardly see it. So as you can see, it pretty much took care of that. So now we need to take off, we need to separate the lens block from the helicoid, which is here. And the best way to do that is we have to come back to the front and take off a couple of parts here. As you can see, there are some traces of dust and particles in the front, so we will deal with that in a second. So let's take off the front presentation ring. Shows that Helios 44-4. So you can see there are two little holes here and here, and for that we have a special tool that we use, which is lens spinning tool, which looks like that. So one side has this type of ends to take those lens ring off, and the other side has a screwdriver type of, which we're gonna use later to take off lens retainer. So let's proceed. For that, we need to adjust the spinner so it will go into those holes. So let's do that right now. I usually put one in here and then make adjustments until I get to the other hole and tie the screw. So once it's ready, all I have to do is put a little force counterclockwise, and the ring start moving. So further, we have a tool that I use that I love, which is a really tight rubber, sticky rubber that helps me take off the presentation ring cover. So I put right on the top of it and start turning, and as you can see, it can take off the ring fairly easily. Of course, I used a little lubricant to further make refurbishing, so the turning is smooth, and it'll be a lot easier to take off the ring. So that's pretty much it, and we can take off the ring momentarily. So it's off. So we don't need this. We'll just put it aside. Now, in order to take the front lens block off, you can see there are some screws inside here, and there are larger screws here. Let's see, one screw here, and you can see it right there, one screw here, and right beside it there is a smaller screw. Well, smaller screws, there's 3 of them. They're holding this ring here, which we will need to take off, and then we will take off the larger screws, which will release the front element block, which kind of falls through, and the whole thing, the whole glass element will comes out. So let's go ahead and proceed. For taking off these screws, I use a little bit of WD-40 right here, and I squeeze the drop in there and in here, and on the 3rd screw right here. We'll take this guy out as well. Okay, so now you can see that this ring can be taken off, and now we can see further into the lens that we have 3 additional screws that we will deal with. Now, my suggestion here is to make a mark, because it's important to have this lens, when you start assembling it back, put it in the same location as they were. For that, I like to use some dental tools, and this one has a sharp end, and I make a small scratch right here, which is I just kind of scratch the line here on the bottom and here at the top. Then when I put it back together, all I have to do is line up these marks, and I know it will be assembled correctly. Okay, I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, they're there. So now we can take off these screws. And I can see the traces of Loctite, so I'm glad that we used WD for that. So now that those screws are off, all we have to do is kind of push this lens block from the back, and the entire lens block is off. Now we do not need the helicoid, because the helicoid and focusing block is working fine, and so we'll put this aside, and we will be dealing with the lens block. We can see the traces of Loctite and a little bit of oil, so we kind of want to wipe it a little bit and to avoid any oil get into aperture blades. This lens is in a really good condition and we need to clean it. So that's pretty much it. We'll put the lens that holding the block aside, and we'll be dealing with the rest of the lens block. So in order to clean the lens, we can start with the back part of the lens elements assembly, or the front, doesn't really matter. But in order to do that, we will need to adjust our lens spanner, which is the tool that I showed you before. Only in this case, we will need to make adjustments to the distance, because we have the ring retainer that is controlling the front element with this ring retainer. It has grooves on this side and on this side, and that's what we need to take off the front element. So I made an adjustments of the lens spanner, and we want to be extra careful here, because we do not want to damage the lens element, and very nicely and gently unscrew that lens retainer. So once we put it in there, we want to gently turn, and as you can see, it was fairly easy this time to take off the lens retainer. For this, I have further need assistance of my sticky rubber tool, a lens spanner tool, to take off the lens retainer. And this that does a very, very good job. So as you can see, it's turning, and it's pretty much off. So now as you can see, it's off, and the front lens element is exposed. So at which point I will just simply need the smaller, use the rubber tool to just let the lens fall into it, and that's where I kind of keep it so we can clean it. And so you can see there's other lenses inside it. When if I see the particles of dust, I just use my lens blower and clean those out. It's important to do that, because time we will actually take off the further lens elements and clean them as well, because I can see some traces of dust. So now that I'm dealing with the actual element, I put my gloves on. I don't want to leave any fingerprints, but you can see the traces of dust on this front element, and the way to get rid of it is we use lighter fluid, which works very well for that particular purpose. So I put it, I'm holding it on this sticky rubber tool, and I put this on the element and put a little bit of lighter fluid, and kind of clean the lens element with it. Once the one side is cleaned, obviously I will use blower to make sure there's no dust. Turn it around and use the other side to further clean the element. Holding it kind of from the bottom, and use this circling technique, you can clean that element very well. As you can see, it's a fairly clean element now. Probably will do it again because it's an old lens element, and so we're going to do this one more time. Use the other corner and put some more lighter fluid on it and do a little further cleaning. This element is it's not a I believe it's a multi-coated element, so we need to be gentle, of course. And you can see it's now quite clean. So now we will take off additional elements which exposes aperture blades, and but you know, aperture blades are very clean, free of oil, and you can see that here. As you can see, you can, you know, by pulling on this pin, you can open and close the aperture blades, and they're very nice and free of oil and clean. So obviously we'll use the blower to further get rid of any dust particles. And now we put this aside, start dealing with additional lens element. It is important to understand and remember the placement and how it faces in, so you can put this back and assemble it correctly. So obviously it's an upside down, so you can, and I can see it from here that it requires maybe just a blower or not, but you can see there's a particle of dust here, but we actually going to use the lighter fluid to clean it. This is just a ring retainer, so we'll just put it aside, put this lens here. We'll go through the process of doing exactly what we did with the front element. And just use a cloth and a little bit of lighter fluid to further clean the element here. And the circling motion, we take care of the cleaning part. Okay, and now we'll turn it around and we'll use the other end and start cleaning the front of that other element. So, and again, same thing, circular motion, gentle. We'll clean that lens element as well. Now, that's better. Okay, so now going back, Turn around, it's inside. Now we're ready to place our original front element back on its place. Just like that. And it's in there. And it looks really nice and clean. So at this point, we're going back to our ring retainer, and we want to kind of clean this up because it has a lot of dust and particles from the edge of the lens, and I just like to clean it a little bit. I use tweezers to drop it in place, and then of course I use my rubber tool to put it and screw it down, and it's very, very, very smooth. So as you can see how useful this rubber tool is. Once it reaches to a point where it goes below the surface, then I use the lens spanner tool to further tightening it. So once it's tight enough, I don't want to over tie it. You don't need to do that. It's pretty much done. So I can see there's somebody, I guess, was making scratches on the lens, so I'll just touch up. And make it look good. And that's about it. So we completed the front element cleaning. And now we will be dealing with the rear. And it definitely requires attention. Now we're ready to do the same thing. We'll just deal with the rear lens element. For that, I have another tool, which is an old compass tool that I modified, and instead of sharp points, which here I have here, I created a lens spanner type of points, which allows me to open the lens retainer rings, and it's easily can be adjusted. So you can see it, the same thing. There is a groove here and here, and I use this tool, which does excellent job. Oh, it's easy. So now I'll just use the rubber tool to open and unscrew that lens retainer ring. So same type of a process. Once it's done, take that ring retainer out. Okay, and the lens element is sitting right here. So we'll use the same technique to drop the lens element into my sticky rubber tool. We'll go ahead and proceed to cleaning that. And we follow the same process. Just squeeze a little bit of lighter fluid, and same circling motions, we clean the element nicely and gently. And once it's done here, we'll just turn it around and clean the other side. Yes, that's it. So now it goes back to the same side as it came from, and we are putting that element back into its place, just like that. Now, ready to use the retainer ring and put it back where it came from. Now, let's put this back. And we use this sticky rubber tool to screw it back in. In this case, we don't need to use other tools. I never want to make it too tight. So the lens element is clean, with an exception of here. So for that, I will just use pure alcohol, and I will show you how to do it. 99% pure alcohol with the cotton swabs, and it works very, very well. And places where it actually has traces of oil and grease, pure alcohol will take it off with ease. So we'll just take a little cotton swab and kind of dip it in alcohol, and move that aside. Go back to our lens, so you can see how I'm going to clean it. It dries pretty quickly, and does a good job. Okay, I do the same thing throughout the surface of a lens block, element block, and just kind of clean it up all over. And this way I know it's clean. See the traces of Loctite is in there, but Loctite can be cleaned with 100% acetone with nail polish remover. It just melts the traces of Loctite thread lock momentarily, and we will do that as well. So I dipped that cotton swab in 100% acetone with a nail polish remover, and we're going to clean the traces of Loctite. And as you can see, it goes away. It just melts it. Okay, we have one more place. Of course, you need to put a little bit of force to do that, because it's old stuff, but it goes away there is no other way to do this. As you can see, it's all gone. So now we will put that lens block back into a helicoid. Now, the attention that you want to pay here is this pin right here. That pin has to go into this part. I'll show you this in a second. It has to go inside this part right here, because that controls the aperture. And so we will do that just like that. I'm kind of holding it so I can see that part, and I will be dropping or placing this cylinder with attempt to make sure that it goes right inside it. And you can see that I did it on the first attempt. So now, once it's in there, all we have to do is assemble our lens the way we did disassembly. So first of all, we will need to screw these 3 screws, larger screws, into its position. And if you remember, we did a marking, which is this guy right here. Once we line up the markings, which we did right over here, right there, we can put this lens block back on its original place, which is right here. No problem. And the last one. It helps when you have a magnetic screwdriver. It helps a lot. So making those marks at the beginning was absolutely necessary to make sure that the block is sitting on its original location. And then I, of course, tightening the screws back. And now we are ready to put another ring, which we'll need to use it with the additional 3 screws. And this ring, it doesn't matter where it's going as long as it lines up with the holes that we took it off, which is lines up. You just can easily line it up. And very gently, because I tighten them up a little bit later once I put them in their place. So the next one, going here, going in. Okay, this time it works just fine. It's just a matter of lining up correctly and screw it in. we need to clean the front presentation cover, and once we clean that, it's I'm gonna place it with a little bit of the DW40. I like to do that. Okay. So to do that, we are going to use our syringe and put just a tiny bit of DW40 into these threads. Makes it nice and smooth. Screwing it back in. That's it. And we will need assistance from our friend sticky rubber. And you can see how smooth it turns. How can we do this? It's hard to do it with a finger, so that's a perfect tool for the job. Once it reaches its position, okay, we are done. All we have to do is put the last part, which is mounting ring, back on into this lens. Now we need to keep in mind about this pin that we talked about. It has to touch, you know, this part here, because that's what pushes the aperture blades into position. So what I usually do, I just kind of with my finger, I'm holding know the place where it needs to be, and I drop the mounting ring back on, aligning the screw holes here, 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 and there. So now that it is aligned, I am going to put the screws back inside. So take the first screw, again gently. We don't want to damage anything, and we will do the same thing on the opposite side. And two more. And the last screw. Goes in. Now I can tie it a little bit, make it a little tighter. All the screws, not much, the last one. Okay, and we'll just clean some traces of our DW40, and this lens is done, and it's clean and hopefully ready for many more years of service. Hopefully somebody will purchase it. I know they will be happy with the lens, and it's a beautiful lens, like I said, you know, the wide or open aperture at f2 and 16, and as you can see, by pressing on this pin, it closes and opens aperture, so the lens is performing perfectly. Right now it's sitting on the infinity, and smooth focusing all the way to 0.5. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please write your questions or contact Vintage Photoshop. Thank you and goodbye.